All right, so let's dive into something pretty fascinating today. It's a topic that a lot of people have requested, the intersection of sex and spirituality. It's one of those things that can be like kind of taboo to talk about. But honestly, I think that's what makes it so interesting. And what's really cool about this deep dive is we're looking at YouTube videos that you specifically wanted us to explore.
Yeah, it's like we're tapping into the collective curiosity.
Yeah.
These aren't just, random academic papers or whatever. It's the questions that people are actually asking online.
Exactly. So we've got a really interesting mix here. We've got Paula Herlock, we've got Alan Watts, Eckhart Tolle, Sadhguru, the Little Shaman, Salem Media, and even a Hindu monk. It's going to be really interesting. Talk about a range of perspectives.
Yeah, it's huge. And I think it's not just about understanding like what each person believes, but seeing how these ideas connect, where they clash, what it might mean for us.
Okay, so let's start with Paula Herlock. She's a really interesting voice in this conversation. She's all about the sacredness of sex, but she also really warns against the potential dangers of having multiple partners.
Yeah, she calls it energetic mixing.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And this is actually connected to the whole idea of soul ties. Have you heard about soul ties before?
I have, yeah. It's the idea that when you're intimate with someone, you create this energetic connection that can linger even after the relationship ends. And it's not even just about the person you're with, but also their ancestral karma, like their lineage, their whole energetic baggage, so to speak.
Exactly. So it's a lot to unpack.
And it's pretty intense. It's like suddenly you're not just sleeping with one person, you're sleeping with their entire family history. And it makes you think twice about who you're choosing to be intimate with.
Right. Exactly. It's like, whoa, hold on a second. Do I really want to take all this on? It really challenges this whole idea of casual sex.
Yeah.
And, makes us consider, are we potentially absorbing energy? That might not be beneficial for us in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. Have you ever spent time with someone who just completely drains your energy? It's kind of like that, but on a more subtle level. And Paula Herlock would say that, minimizing the number of partners you have could actually help keep your energetic field a little bit cleaner.
I think that's such an interesting concept, right? Because it's yeah, we talk about physical hygiene, but what about energetic hygiene?
Yeah, exactly. It's like suddenly you're becoming aware of this whole new dimension to relationships. You're not just thinking about the physical or the emotional, but also the energetic. And that fruit punch analogy that she uses is wild. I can't get it out of my head.
Oh, yeah. What was that?
She says it's imagine mixing all these different sodas together, Coke and Sprite and orange juice. You end up with this muddy drink that, doesn't really taste as good as any of the individual flavors. And she's saying that's kind of what happens when we mix our energy with too many different people.
That's so interesting. It's what kind of cocktail are we creating with our own energy, And what's the recipe for a truly vibrant and a delicious life, right?
Yeah. And it makes you think about, if we're talking about energy and spirituality and all this stuff, does that mean celibacy is the answer?
Well, that's a good question. And that's where Alan Watts comes in, right?
Yeah, he's got a very different perspective. And I love how he uses that story about the two Zen monks and the girl to kind of make his point.
Yeah, have you heard that one? It's a classic Alan Watts story.
It's so good. It's about the monk who carries the girl across the river.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And the other monk is all you shouldn't have done that. You broke your vows. But the monk who carried the girl is just well, I put her down the other side of the river. Why are you still carrying her?
Oh, yeah. I love that. And it really showcases Watts' emphasis on non-attachment and spontaneity. It's not about denying your physical desires, but it's about approaching them with this awareness and not getting fixated on them.
Right. It's not the act itself that's the problem, but our attachment to it. Right?
Exactly. And the monk who carries the girl isn't worried about whether it's appropriate or not, or if he should or shouldn't do it. He's just responding to the situation in the moment.
And then we have Sadhguru, who I think brings in a little bit more pragmatism to this conversation, because he acknowledges that sexuality is a powerful force. It's natural. It's hardwired into us as humans, right?
Yeah, he's not advocating for repression or anything like that.
Yeah, right. He doesn't believe in suppressing it or feeling guilty about it. But he's also not saying that you need to make every bodily function a spiritual experience. He kind of makes fun of that whole idea.
Yeah.
He's basically saying, relax, handle your spirituality over here and your sexuality over there. They don't have to be completely intertwined,
Which is kind of a relief, right? You don't have to turn every, intimate encounter into some mystical ritual just to like be a spiritual person.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where we start to see like the whole spectrum of thought on this topic, right?
Totally.
On one end, you have Paula Herlock like advocating for minimizing partners and like energetic purity and all that. And on the other end, you have like Alan Watts and Sadhguru who are emphasizing more like non-attachment and just more relaxed approach in general.
That's such a helpful way to frame it. It's like, okay, so we've got these two poles, and then somewhere in the middle is, well, is sex actually a pathway to higher consciousness? Like, can it actually make you more awake, more aware? And that's where the idea of conscious coupling comes in, right?
Yes, exactly. Conscious coupling, the big one.
It sounds intense, but also really intriguing. Conscious coupling, I mean, it kind of sounds intense, but also, like, really intriguing. Are we talking about, like, tantric sex here?
Yeah, that's one aspect of it for sure. Like Eckhart Tolle talks about Tantra as a way to, bring mindful awareness to the sexual experience.
So, okay, so instead of just like getting lost in the moment, you're actually like present.
Yeah.
And aware of every sensation, every breath, every touch.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Like it's the difference between, mindlessly shoveling food into your mouth and actually savoring each bite, noticing the flavors, the textures.
I love that analogy. So you're basically treating like the sexual experience as a form of meditation.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. And Tom Campbell kind of adds another layer to this, right? He says that as we evolve consciously, our instincts, including our sex drive, become more, what's the word he uses?
Transparent.
Yes, transparent. So we're not like denying our desires, but we're also not controlled by them. It's like we can observe them without getting swept away.
Right. Like there's that space between like the urge and the action.
Exactly. And that actually ties back to what Sadhguru was saying, remember, about choosing like easier routes to consciousness. He's kind of suggesting that if your primary goal is spiritual growth, there might be like more direct ways to get there than trying to use sex as a tool. You know what I mean?
So it's not that sex can't be a spiritual experience, but it might not be the most efficient path, if that makes sense.
Totally. And that leads us to, I think, another really fascinating question. What about the energy exchange that happens during sex? Like, is there something to that?
Ooh, yes. The little shaman talks about that a lot. She even mentions like withholding orgasm for magical workings, which sounds pretty intense to me.
It's definitely a concept that, raises eyebrows for some people. But what I find so interesting is how she connects the physical act of sex, to a deeper energetic reality. She talks about the tantric kiss, where you're literally breathing your energy into your partner.
Wow. And she says that, like, sex isn't just about procreation, but it's about, like, this ultimate union of male and female energy.
Right. And that actually aligns really well with what Silamidi describes as, like, chakra alignment during sex. Have you heard much about the chakras before?
I have, yeah. I find them really fascinating. It's like this whole energy system in the body.
Yeah. And Silamidi paints this really vivid picture of, like, energy flowing between partners.
Right.
Connecting them on a much deeper level than just the physical.
So it's like if you're aligned, the energy from like the root chakra, which is associated with, sexuality and survival and all that, can flow up to like the heart chakra, which is all about love and connection.
Exactly. But he also warns about the potential downsides, right? Like misaligned energies. And the draining effect of having multiple partners, which I think kind of goes back to what Paul Herlock was saying, right?
Yeah, totally. It makes sense when you think about it. Like if you're not energetically compatible with someone, or if you're spreading your energy thin across like multiple connections, it can definitely leave you feeling like depleted rather than energized.
Totally. It's like anything else in life, balance is key. And speaking of a balanced perspective, like I want to shift gears a little bit to a viewpoint that I think might surprise you. We're going to talk about a Hindu monk who sees sex as a form of service to a higher power.
Wait, a monk talking about sex as a service to the divine. My mind is officially blown.
I know, right? It's not exactly what you would expect, but he explains this really interesting concept called samsaras. It's basically rituals that are designed to, like, imprint positive impressions on the soul.
Yeah.
Even before conception.
Whoa. So it's like you're laying the groundwork for a soul to like come into the world and have the best possible experience.
Exactly. It's wild. He compares it to a runner, like training for a marathon. Like every decision, every action is geared towards that ultimate goal.
So in this context, like, sex becomes less about personal pleasure and more about fulfilling, like, a divine purpose.
It's a radical shift in perspective, right?
Yeah.
It makes you realize that even the most intimate aspects of our lives can be seen as, like, acts of service.
Wow, it really does make you think about the bigger picture, right? Okay, so we've heard perspectives on energetic mixing, conscious coupling, and even sex as a service to the divine. It's been quite a ride. What stands out to you the most from all this?
Hmm. I think the common thread running through all of these different viewpoints, regardless of where they fall on the spectrum, is the idea of intentionality. You know, whether you're like minimizing partners to protect your energy field, practicing Tantra to deepen your awareness, or even viewing sex as like this sacred ritual, it's all about approaching the experience with conscious awareness and purpose.
That is such a good point. It's not just about what you're doing, but why you're doing it, right? And speaking of intention, I keep thinking about the little shaman's point about, the energy exchange during sex. She said that we can actually like harness that energy for magical workings, which I have to admit sounds kind of out there to me. Could you maybe unpack that a little bit?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It might seem a little woo-woo at first,
Hmm.
but it actually stems from these ancient wisdom traditions that recognize sexual energy as this like super powerful force, right? It's not just about physical release. It's life force energy. It's creative energy. And some believe it can be like directed and used for specific purposes, almost like magic.
Okay, so it's like instead of just letting that energy, dissipate, you're consciously channeling it towards something.
Exactly. Think of it like this. You have all this energy building up, and instead of just, releasing it, you're using it to fuel your intentions, your desires, your goals.
Whoa, that's powerful. It kind of makes you look at sex in this whole new light, doesn't it? It's not just a physical act, it's this potent force that you can work with. But one thing that both Sadhguru and Alan Watts kind of cautioned against, though, was getting too caught up in all the rules and shoulds around sex, right? Like, don't get so focused on the right way to do it that you lose the joy and the spontaneity of the experience. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I think they're basically saying, let go of the guilt, the shame, all that societal pressure, and just be present with your own experience. Find what works for you. Maybe it's celibacy, maybe it's conscious coupling, maybe it's something else entirely. There's no like one-size-fits-all answer here.
And honestly, that's pretty liberating, isn't it? It's like we're allowed to explore, to experiment, to figure out what feels authentic and aligned with our own, individual path.
For sure. I think that's the key takeaway here. Sex is a powerful force. And like any powerful force, it can be used for good or for ill. You know what I mean? It's up to each of us to decide how we want to wield that power.
That's such a great way to put it. Okay, so before we wrap up this incredible deep dive, I want to circle back to something that really resonated with me. It's something Eckhart Tolle talked about. He said that any craving, whether it's for food, drugs, or even sex, can actually be an opportunity to practice mindfulness.
Oh, yeah, he's highlighting such an important point there. We can actually use our desires as this gateway to greater awareness.
So instead of getting, swept away by the urge, you observe it, you feel it, you allow it to be there without, like, letting it control you.
Right. Exactly. It's about creating that space between the stimulus and your reaction. And that space, that's where your power lies.
That makes so much sense. It's not about suppressing your desires, but about meeting them with this awareness, this curiosity, and, that could apply to so many areas of life, not just sex.
Oh, for sure. It's a practice that can help us, break free from those addictive patterns, cultivate self-control, and yeah, I think even deepen our spiritual journey.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our amazing listeners, with a final thought. We've explored like such a wide range of perspectives on sex and spirituality, from the sacred to the surprising, but ultimately the most important question is like, what resonated with you?
Yeah, exactly. What insights will you take with you from this conversation? And how will you approach your own experiences with this like renewed sense of awareness and intention?
Because, this isn't just about acquiring knowledge. It's about applying it to your own life, your own relationships, your own unique journey. Keep exploring, keep questioning, keep diving deeper. We're so excited to see where your curiosity leads you next.